Continuous improvement in Vermont schools, shifts in culture and practice. In this module, participants will gain a deeper understanding of an improvement science approach to continuous improvement and the 6 improvement principles. And you'll discuss cultural shifts required for sustainable continuous improvement. So what is continuous improvement? Well, let's break it down. First off, it's continuous, which means it's ongoing and happens incrementally. We aren't talking about work accomplished in one fell swoop, but through a clear and sustained process. Second, it's concerned with improvement, not just general improvement or any old improvement, but growth towards specific data-supported goals for our students and our schools. So there you have it. Continuous improvement is an ongoing process of growth towards specific goals. In Vermont, continuous improvement planning is expected yearly of all schools and at the LEA level, as described in the Education Quality Standards. This planning should be focused on meeting the expectations of the Education Quality Standards with specific goals based on the results of a comprehensive needs assessment. Here at the Agency of Education, we are also using an improvement science approach to continuous improvement. It is our prerogative to learn these principles and practices alongside our LEAs. The Vermont system of continuous improvement is grounded in collective accountability at the state, local, and school level. This means that we all bear the responsibility for planning, implementing, and supporting continuous improvement. If we work together, we will create the highest quality, most equitable learning environments possible for our students. Continuous school improvement describes the work that the schools do, linking the essential elements, and is a process of evidence, engagement, and artifacts. In order to assist supervisory unions or districts in helping their schools improve, the Education Quality Assurance Team is adopting an improvement science approach for supporting Vermont school systems. Improvement science principles follow closely to the scientific method that's already being taught in schools across Vermont. This means utilizing a data-driven approach to determine the problem or issue that needs to be changed before formulating a hypothesis and actually testing or implementing the change, with the goal of producing the improvement desired. After a change is tested, often in a single classroom, for example, you compare your results to your original hypothesis. Often, you may have to adjust your approach using iterative cycles known as plan, do, study, and act. A key is to study and then practice within a well-defined system, a system that may be producing results that you wish to see changed. Another important facet of continuous improvement is that it relies on the internal capacity and accountability of those closest to the work. In this respect, continuous improvement is guided by those doing the work within the system, as opposed to other methods in organizational improvement, which historically have often been driven from the top of management down through the organization seeking improvement. There is a strong historical basis for using improvement science principles in your schools to achieve positive change. Historically, improvement science dates well back into the 20th century, when W. Edwards Deming promoted it in Japan after World War II. You may be familiar with Toyota, which incorporated it into its manufacturing process. By focusing on quality and system-wide improvement continuously, Toyota became the #1 auto and truck manufacturer in the world. More recently, the healthcare industry has been adopting improvement science principles while examining their delivery systems. Their system analysis is user-centered based upon the needs of their patients. They also have incorporated data and evidence-based practices into defining their problems, as well as measuring the impact of specific proposed changes aimed at obtaining specific patient-centered goals. If we insert students in the place of automotive customers or healthcare patients, we find that the process of continuous improvement can serve student needs in the rapidly changing world of the 21st century. By focusing on learning about the system that is serving them, we can seek to make adjustments or changes to it with the goal of improving outcomes for all of our Vermont learners.
These are the 6 principles of improvement on which we will focus our technical assistance and support for all schools and all learners. Improvement principle number 1 is related to making the work of improvement problem-specific and user-centered. That is, ensuring that those closest to the work, the users, are the focus of the improvement efforts. In this case, we're talking about students and teachers. Student and teacher voice is key when trying to understand the problem and the system that produces it. User interviews with students, teachers, and even parents are a great way to gauge how the system is working. Improvement principle number 2 ensures focus on variation. This entails understanding variation in student performance, pedagogy, and the ways in which curriculum and instructional materials are enacted in practice. Evidence from experimental research often focuses on average differences, so it worked for some learners in some circumstance. But how do these results actually play out when they're embedded in classroom practice in a variety of settings? They don't necessarily ensure reduction in inequities. Variability in outcomes remain regardless of a program's demonstrated effects in experimental research. So when considering such interventions, educators and administrators may still be left asking the question, can our system reliably advance all students through, and do the students most in need receive services? Improvement science is about practical problem solving, achieving quality results reliably under a variety of conditions. Improvement principle number 3 involves seeing the system that produces the current outcomes. So typically, improvement science is about improving systems, not fixing individuals. These quotes on the screen enhance the importance of better understanding problems of practice by seeing and understanding the underlying system. In the video, Atul Gawande explores ways in which people in other fields of work have learned to analyze and understand their systems in order to make continuous improvements to practice. Improvement principle number 4 relates to practical measures for improvement. In improvement efforts, it's important to think about the types of data that will help with developing and monitoring change ideas for improvement. These measures should be practical, meaningful, inexpensive, and user-friendly. Improvement decisions should be based on data-driven needs assessments and the Vermont Education Quality Standards. In contrast to measurements for accountability, measurements for improvement are used to provide a baseline against which you can compare measurements after changes are made, deeply understand how processes are being implemented and how they're progressing, to learn how well the new process is working and how users feel about it, and to motivate educators and leaders to continually examine data for improvement. Improvement principle number 5 is about engaging in disciplined inquiry. This entails conducting small-scale, iterative plan-do-study-act cycles in which change ideas are tested for efficacy and in which decisions are made. At the end of each cycle, users can decide whether to adapt, adopt, or abandon the change idea. Once enough cycles are conducted to ensure confidence in the change idea, it can be spread across other contexts on a wider scale, and even further adapted to meet the needs of all users. This ramping of the PDSA cycles is graphically represented on the slide. Additionally, you can view the video for an example of how these successive tests of change occur. The final improvement principle relates to a way in which educators and researchers can collaborate to accelerate improvement efforts. Networked improvement communities, or NICs, by which they're more commonly referred, are scientific learning communities in which researchers and practitioners collaborate around common problems of practice using the previously described improvement principles. In these research practice partnerships, researchers and practitioners learn together and they co-construct knowledge together. Members conduct improvement research by developing and testing out change ideas and building collective knowledge, which can then be shared across schools, districts, and supervisory unions. Members codify knowledge by developing tested tools and practices, and then they build capacity for educators to continue to conduct this improvement research in their own settings. So the improvement science principles are the foundation for problem solving, along with considering these 3 fundamental questions. What are we trying to accomplish? How will we know when a change is an improvement? And what change can we make that will result in an improvement?
Now that you've been introduced to the foundations of continuous improvement planning in Vermont, Let's dig into the actual phases of completing a continuous improvement plan. Recall that in Vermont, continuous improvement planning is expected yearly of all schools and at the supervisory union or school district level, as described in Vermont's education quality standards. This planning should be focused on meeting the expectations of the standards with specific goals based on the results of a comprehensive needs assessment. The Vermont system of continuous improvement is grounded in collective accountability at the state, local, and school level. This means that we all bear responsibility for planning, implementing, and supporting continuous improvement. If we work together, we'll create the highest quality, most equitable learning environments possible for all of our students. The Agency of Education's Education Quality Assurance Team has created the Education Quality and Continuous Improvement Framework. This document should be the primary resource and guide for school districts, supervisory unions, or schools engaged in the process of continuous improvement planning. This document is comprehensive, featuring tools and resources to support schools and school districts in these efforts. The process for continuous improvement planning, as proposed by the Vermont Agency of Education, takes place in 4 phases. First, schools or LEAs assess their needs and determine change ideas to meet these needs. This is a data-driven process. Second, change ideas are piloted at a small scale level to determine their effectiveness in achieving improvement goals. Third, change ideas that are proving to be effective are implemented and spread to a larger scale. And fourth, schools and LEAs work to sustain the changes made that will lead to improvement. While the steps for continuous improvement planning described in this presentation and in the framework document are not mandated, use of Vermont's Continuous Improvement Plan template is expected of all schools and LEAs. The process described in this presentation and in the framework document fulfills all of the narratives needed to complete Phase 1 of Vermont's Continuous Improvement Plan template. The first phase, Assessing Needs and Innovate, is essentially conducting a comprehensive needs assessment in your LEA or school. So what is a comprehensive needs assessment? Well, there are several lenses through which to answer this question, and here are 2 examples. A comprehensive needs assessment is the first step in developing any continuous improvement plan. It's a process of looking at data about districts or schools to learn what has occurred, is occurring, and needs to occur to improve student outcomes. Or, a comprehensive needs assessment promotes a culture of reflection, collaborative inquiry, deep learning, and shared responsibility for improvement. Well, both statements are true, and they have a couple of key factors in common. First, both describe a process of learning about a school or district's current state. And second, both describe a process that occurs before and supports actions towards improvement. The proposed process for completing Phase 1 of Continuous Improvement Planning, Assess Needs and Innovate, occurs in these 6 steps. First, the school or LEA will assemble a team of collaborative stakeholders to conduct the comprehensive needs assessment. Second, this team will agree on or create a shared vision for their work. Then, the team will determine broad areas of focus for their comprehensive needs assessment based on an overview of the data. From there, the team will identify priority problems of practice and conduct a root cause analysis within these problems. This work will lead to the creation of a theory of practice improvement or action to drive the continuous improvement work of the team. Your theory of improvement or action can be represented visually using a driver diagram. Briefly, a driver diagram represents your theory of how to change the system. Per the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching, a driver diagram should be explicit. It's a living document that can change based on results, and in fact we're introducing it now because a driver diagram should be populated as you conduct Phase 1 and each of the steps. And finally, a driver diagram focuses your efforts on high leverage areas of change. Essentially, a driver diagram shows the relationship between your specific goals based on your problems of practice for improvement, the drivers or system components that have the greatest impact on your outcomes, and your change ideas and measures for improvement. This, collectively, is your theory of improvement. So, with the driver diagram introduced, let's get back to our steps for conducting a comprehensive needs assessment, which is essentially Phase 1, Assess Needs and Innovate, of the continuous improvement planning process. As was said before, the first step is to assemble a needs assessment team. And the question you should ask yourself is, have we included representatives from all stakeholder groups within our learning community with diverse perspectives and areas of expertise represented? From there, your team will develop or revise a shared vision, answering the question, what are our shared goals for our students and schools? Then, with that vision identified to help guide your needs assessment process, you're going to conduct a broad data overview, determining what is the current state of your school or LEA. Having collected a broad overview of the data, the team's next goal is to identify priority problems of practice. This begins by asking focus questions. Based on our data, our shared vision, pre-existing work, and the education quality standards, what area or areas should our assessment focus on first? From there, you're going to recognize trends in the data. What patterns or trends do the data reveal? And what is this data telling us? Having done that, you'll arrive at priority problems of practice. What unmet student needs or problems of practice have we uncovered? And which should we prioritize? Which are the most important to address, and why? As was said before, as you conduct the steps of Phase 1, Assess Needs and Innovate, of the continuous improvement planning process, essentially a comprehensive needs assessment, update your theory of improvement, in this case, within a driver diagram. Having identified priority problems of practice, we're going to take one of those priority problems of practice and insert them in the corresponding area of our driver diagram, as indicated here. Having identified priority problems of practice, your next step is to transform these into specific, measurable goals for improvement. This represents one of the three big questions in continuous improvement planning. What are we trying to accomplish? This needs to be pretty specific, and it needs to be measurable in order to be an effective goal. So what will be improved? Come up with a clear operational definition. By how much will we improve? You need to have a measurable, specific, numerical goal. By when will this improvement occur? Make it time-bound and give a time frame. And specifically, for whom or for what will this improvement be sought? You're going to need a target population, a setting, or a process within your system. As with your problem of practice, when you've identified your specific measurable goal, insert it into your theory of improvement, or in this case, your driver diagram. This goal has been written as by June of 2019, 70% of 11th and 12th grade students will enroll in at least one flexible pathways option each year. This goal is numerical and measurable, it's time-bound, and it identifies specific groups for which we are seeking improvement. It meets many of the criteria outlined in the previous slide. Having conducted a broad data overview and arrived at priority problems of practice, then transform those problems of practice into specific, measurable goals for improvement, we now dig a little bit more deeply to determine why exactly these priority problems of practice exist, helping us to determine which change ideas will effectively lead to improvement in these areas. Conducting a root cause analysis involves digging more deeply into the data surrounding our problems of practice to determine the specific environmental or instructional factors that have led to our current outcomes. We call these drivers. 3 questions to guide this process are: what processes or conditions might be contributing to your problems of practice? What additional data brings clarity to these hypothesized causes? And what trends and issues do the data reveal? What needs are illustrated by the data found within our priority problems of practice? Specific needs that can be addressed with specific change ideas in the next step. Completing a fishbone diagram with your team is one way to conduct a root cause analysis, determining primary and secondary drivers of your problem of practice and your current outcomes. In this example, primary drivers appear in the boxes at the top of each rib. What might be causing few students to take advantage of flexible pathways options? Well, large groups of causes could be interest, awareness, perceived ability, or general logistics. You'll notice underneath or above each of these primary drivers are listed more specific secondary drivers along the rib. As before, be sure to update your driver diagram as you work, this time with the primary and secondary drivers that your team feels have the highest leverage on your desired outcomes. With your team's priority, primary and secondary drivers in mind, you can dig even more deeply into your root causes through a process called the 5 whys. This process begins with your problem of practice, that few students are taking part in flexible pathways options. Now ask why. Well, the first answer will be one of your primary drivers, that students are not aware of options. You'll remember from your fishbone diagram in previous slides that awareness was one of our primary drivers. You'll notice that after this statement, the word data appears. Is this statement supported by data? Either data you currently have on hand or additional data that you'll need to collect to support or disprove this statement. This is true at each step of your 5 whys process. We're going to ask why again. Well, our answer now is a secondary driver, that there is little digital communication around flexible pathways. Again, this should be supported by data, either data you already have on hand or data that you'll collect to support or disprove this statement. Ask why again. Well, the answer came back that the team responsible for communication is unfamiliar with the digital platforms being used. Why again? There's a need for professional development around these platforms. At this point, we have arrived at a fundamental root cause for our current problem of practice. With specific fundamental root causes identified, now we can begin to discuss change ideas to correct or address these root causes and lead to improvement in our problem of practice. This begins with the question, what do we want to accomplish? Well, the answer to that was the specific measurable goal that we wrote. Next, how will we know that a change is an improvement? This speaks to the idea that we need to measure as we are implementing a new change idea. We need to establish whether or not the intervention we've put into place is in fact leading to improvement. We can't improve what we can't measure. And finally, what changes are we going to make that might be an improvement? What will our change ideas be? So where do change ideas come from? Well, really from 4 places. First, from research knowledge. What does academic literature have to say about solving this problem? Second, from practice knowledge. What have other organizations in our field done to solve this same problem? Third, from design or creative thinking. What new or innovative solutions might we design to address this problem that we're having? And finally, through close investigation of the problem. What does our analysis of this problem indicate might be a helpful solution? What clues within this problem will tip us off to what change ideas might be most effective? As was said before, we can't improve what we can't measure. If we're going to take the time and the energy and input the resources to implement a change idea, we need to determine whether or not it's actually leading to improvement. A family of 3 measurement types should be used during continuous improvement planning. First, outcome measures, a measure of the achievement of the overall goal. This is usually written right into your specific measurable goal. For example, from our driver diagram, by June of 2019, 70% of 11th and 12th grade students will enroll in at least one flexible pathway option. Well, what are we looking for? Enrollment in flexible pathways. That's our outcome measure. While not a direct measure of our desired outcome, a process measure does allow us to measure more often whether or not we're making improvement. This is accomplished by measuring the implementation of a change idea or a driver. For example, one way to achieve greater enrollment in flexible pathways options might be to assign staff members to handle digital flexible pathways communication. While we can't measure enrollment as often as we might like, we can keep track of the number of posts that this person makes, the number of views by students of these digital communications, or generally assess student awareness of flexible pathways options following assigning the staff member to these responsibilities. Again, not a direct measure of enrollment, our outcome that we desire, but a measure of the process we think will get us to that outcome. Finally, teams should consider employing balancing measures, which measure the unintended impact of a change idea on another area of the system. For example, if we address scheduling conflicts between flexible pathways offerings and other course options, a logistical concern, what might some unintended consequences be? Well, we might create a number of conflicts between non-flexible pathways options. We all know how complicated scheduling can be. Or our efforts to increase enrollment in flexible pathways might reduce enrollment in advanced placement courses. Again, our systems are complex. When we make a change in one area, we need to try to anticipate whether or not it will impact another area of practice. As before, don't forget to update your driver diagram, this time with the change ideas that your team has identified as being those that may lead to your desired outcomes, and with measures that you'll use to determine whether or not these change ideas are really leading to improvement.